Hey, everybody. So if you have been hanging out with us for the last couple seasons of the podcast, you probably remember us mentioning Flaututi in our past episodes. Our friend Molly Sharp, who incidentally was also a guest in season 1, started Flaututi to share her awesome duet arrangements of standard viola rep, which are great for teaching, and it has now grown into a wide-ranging catalog of one-of-a-kind resources for violists and beyond. Steph, do you remember when we played one of the duets from a holiday bundle together?
Yes, it's one of my most cherished holiday memories.
Aww.
But actually, one of my favorites is something that all string instrumentalists would love. It's called Making Double Stops Ring, a guided exploration of just intonation. And Molly actually shared the viola version with us last year, and I am not exaggerating when I say that it completely changed the way I think about intonation. No one has ever explained it to me like this before. I think that we all realize on some level that a B in all situations is not the same, but why?
Yeah. Have you ever had that classic argument in a string quartet setting when you're trying to tune a chord and maybe we're playing that B and we're being told, no, it needs to go lower. No, it needs to go higher. It needs to go here. Wouldn't it be amazing to save all those hours for our string quartet students with no debate? We just know where it's supposed to go. Everyone agrees because there's only one way.
Right. You can just gift them copies of this book.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing personal. Just here's a book about intonation. Well, Molly has made it easy for all of us to play in tune. So whether you play viola, violin, cello, or bass, there's a version for you. You can find this pragmatic book, viola duet arrangements of classic viola repertoire, and so much more at vlatutti.com under Marketplace, or look in this episode's show notes.
So sometimes in therapy, you talk about like really, really heavy stuff. And sometimes in therapy, you go in and you say, I have no time for anything. And I don't even know what I'm going to eat for the next week or whatever. And your therapist is like, well, you know what you could do? You could get a crock pot. And I kind of laughed and I said, well, actually, I have 4 crock pots. And she laughed at me.
I love it that, in therapy, like it's almost impossible to get your therapist to give you actual advice, right? And your therapist was like, well, here's what you need to do.
She says, well, better yet, if you've got multiple crock pots, why don't you try to plan out X amount of meals and just make them all at once and then put them in, different containers and you can have them for the rest of the week. So that is exactly what I did at the beginning of this week. I planned it out and I made 3 separate meals going at the same time in 3 separate crock pots. It was quite the operation, but I'm very happy with it. It was really smart because now I don't have to think about that all week.
Exactly.
And maybe even not next week.
Exactly.
Because we have so much food.
I love that. I love crock pots.
I love crock pots too so much, actually. I love this time of year with the food. I love fall and winter food. I love stews and soups and slow cooking things that make your whole house smell like cozy and warm. Oh my God, I love it so much.
I know what we should do. We should start another podcast all about crock pot fare. And we should call it the crock pod.
Okay. Let's get a page on the website for that right now. Crock pod, who's in?
Crock pod.
What would talk me through some of the topics on the crock pod?
Crock pot reviews.
Oh yes, that's true. Because I always forget that there are brands of crock. Are we saying crock? Should we be saying slow cooker? No, we'll just say crock pot.
Crock pot.
Crock pot. Then nobody knows if you're saying
It's the crock pot, crock pod.
Recipes for sure. How about tragic stories about crock pots like in This Is Us?
Oh God, that would be a downer. What if there was an offshoot that was all about crocodiles?
I bet there are recipes for crocodile meat in a crock pot.
Oh my God, crock pot
Crock
recipes.
Have some crock in a crock.
Hear about all in crock pod.
I can't. So good. It seems like a real natural direction for us to go.
I mean,
next. It really fits with our brand to tag on from the last episode.
You guys would listen, right?
We'll take your ideas for the crock pod anytime, guys. Welcome to the Viola-centric podcast. We are two curious violists creating a safe place to have authentic and challenging conversations in the professional music world. I'm Liz.
And I'm Steph. Let's jump in the deep end.
How's it going?
Good. I have a whole lot to say right now.
It's awesome. I'm so happy for you.
I mean, I have a lot of stuff going on, but it feels like I'm busy, which I guess is good or not. I don't know. What's it like to be busy anymore?
I had a panic attack yesterday.
Oh, no.
No, I didn't have a real panic attack.
Okay.
I mean, I know people suffer from like I've had minor anxiety attacks in the past, but I just had this moment yesterday where I was looking around my house with all the stuff that I have to deal with. And I just was like, oh my God, I don't know where to put my time right now. It just felt like the to-do list was so long that I was never going to be able to get everything done that I need. And I know that to-do lists never go away. Like everyone has a to-do list for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when it feels like there are 20 different things that need me now, that is very stressful. I genuinely don't know what to prioritize. So that's what this week has been like for me.
Oh, no.
And I'm not trying to complain. I have this aversion to when people talk about how busy they are, actually. I really don't like it. I read this article years ago in the New York Times. I think it was in the New York Times. It was an op-ed, and the title of it was literally, "Busyness is not a status symbol." So I don't want to confuse this with me talking about how busy I am so everybody understands how much I have to do, because I detest that. But also many of us are proactive individuals and we want to be doing things and we want to be out there like producing and creating. And with that comes a certain level of, well, it creates a longer to-do list.
Yeah. I can understand how it's not very interesting to talk about how busy you are, to hear about how busy somebody else is.
No, it's horrible.
I think what's more interesting to me is how are you feeling? And is that a symptom of your life right then? And that's a clue as to what's going on in your life, but it's not your status.
Yep, I love that. That reminds me of something else I try to remember, which I love this so much. I think it was Anne Lamott who said that we're human beings, not human doings.
Oh,
I love it so much.
that's a great... Put that on a shirt.
Yes. Can we, maybe I can contact her. Be like, can we use this on a Viola-centric shirt?
Yes.
I want to be a human being. I don't want to be a human doing. Yeah, that's great, Steph. That's true. And actually, it puts it into perspective because sometimes if you have a lot of things going on, you feel great. You're like excited and you're energized and you're running around and like it's fun. And sometimes like yesterday, I was overwhelmed. I felt overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. So, working through that today.
Good.
And at the end of the day, you could just do one thing at a time. That's all you could do.
That's the truth. And whatever you get done is what you get done. And
Yep.
that's the end of it.
Yep.
There's this definition of serenity. It's worrying about the things that are within your sphere of influence and letting go of everything else. And that's something that I have to really check myself on when I get overwhelmed with the problems of the world. You can get overwhelmed really easily. So maybe ask yourself the question, is this something that I can do something about or is it not? I'm making it sound a lot easier than it probably is in practice, but I don't know, maybe that will help like one person out there.
It's great.
But I definitely feel that like I want to be busy. I want to feel productive. That's my threeness. I totally know that about myself. I measure happiness by if I felt productive. If I checked things off on my list, I'm like, yes, I'm a good human. I'm doing the thing that I said I was going to do and I'm checking all the boxes.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny?
That is amazing. Yeah. We've been talking a lot about our Enneagram stuff lately, which is so interesting, I think.
Yeah.
And my two-ness is, I've said, yeah, I can do that to so many things to so many people that I don't have a list.
Yes.
And now I'm going, oh my God, all these people are going to be let down because I can't do all the things in the moment that I need to do because I've said yes to too many things.
Oh, you sweet little two.
I mean, it's a work in progress, you know? Yeah. Even talking about it right now, I feel myself getting all tied up in knots. It's so funny. I'm just going to be real about it. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I love everything I'm doing. There's nothing I want to not do, but just continuing to be mindful of the way I spend my time and also have time for myself. There's none of that this week. None. But also, I think these things ebb and flow, especially in our career. And for parents, this time of year is really crazy. For students, this time of year is really crazy. For people who teach students, we just kicked off the first night of Ninth Street String Quartet Intensive, which is so exciting and so much fun. But oh my gosh, for the last couple weeks, just trying to get all the balls rolling for that. It's a lot. That will settle down. There are things that will settle out, but it's like riding that wave as the things like build up and then slow down. And that's the work, probably more than anything else, I think.
What have you been doing to take care of yourself?
That's a hard question to answer. I'm definitely eating better. So I have at least one element, because really, who doesn't get into the situation where they don't have food handy? And then what are you doing? You're making bad decisions because you're stressed and you don't know what else to do. And I live within driving distance of 3 separate restaurants with drive-thrus.
Ooh.
So you guys, that struggle is real.
Dangerous.
I'm not going to lie.
You're in the Bermuda Triangle of fast food.
I could
Arlington.
walk to 2 of them. Although I would never do that because they have drive-thrus. Why would I ever walk to one? So that's where we're at right now. It's all great, exciting things. So sleep is another thing that I think is really important. And I have been trying to get enough sleep so that I'm not totally run down.
Good.
So our guest on this episode, Susanna Klein, she is something else.
I love that she has given herself the title Practice Maven.
Yes.
I think anybody who is like a maven of anything is somebody that I want to be associated with.
Totally.
Maven. I mean,
I know. To pull that word out. How would you define a maven?
like a badass.
Yes.
Let's see. What is...
Are we going to look it up?
Yeah, let's find out.
Love it.
Oh, Maven means an expert or connoisseur.
Oh, how about that?
It's Yiddish.
It's Yiddish.
All the best words are Yiddish, man.
Oh my God, that's so true. Thank you for the Yiddish.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
So Susanna Klein, Practice Maven. I love that title. She really is a true connoisseur of practice techniques. And I just love the idea of flipping practice on its head and making it fun as a purpose.
Yeah.
Because I think we talk about this with Susanna, but we all have some baggage associated with practice.
Totally. Yep. Confession time, people. I'm a terrible practicer. Always have been. My practice before was just like messing around, and she makes it seem like messing around in practice actually is okay. You can figure out things about your playing by being experimental, and actually that it is more fun. It's just funneling that into a little bit more structure, which really resonated with me big time. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for people to hear what she has to say. And the other part too is, especially in our busy adult lives, I think this motivation to basically produce the best results in the fastest amount of time is something we can all relate to. We've spent half of our conversation today talking about the aspect of busyness in our lives. So being efficient and also enjoying the experience, that's a big deal.
And this just occurred to me, Liz, just by listening to you talk so eloquently about practice. There's a lot going on online talking about practice these days, and how the amount of practice that you do doesn't necessarily make you a paragon of ability. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. The measure of how long you've been practicing has always been a virtue in music.
Yep.
But I wonder if that's just because people had no idea how to practice and we weren't teaching practicing.
Right?
And so what if we as a community can totally flip that? Teach our young people, teach people our age, people in college, how to practice. And then we can get rid of this falsity that the amount of hours that you practice is indicative of your ability on the instrument.
I love that.
It's a revolution, right?
Yes. Yes.
Let's get rid of that. Let's just kill that fallacy right now and Let's all learn how to be efficient in practice, and then you can feel that success yourself.
I love it so much. There is definitely a shift that could occur on multiple levels. First of all, of course, with ourselves. In teaching, that is one question that's always been hard for me when a parent asks me, how much time a day should my child be practicing? And my answer is always like, well, it really depends. More often than not, if you impose a time frame for a student, like if their lessons are 30 minutes, they have to practice 30 minutes a day. For that child, often 30 minutes is a pretty big ask daily. This goes back to that sense of overwhelm.
I think at that early level, and all the private teachers don't at me, but at that early level, the reason why you're asking them to do something each day is so that they feel more natural in the position, in the unnatural position that we're asking them to play in.
Yep.
It's a familiarity and muscle memory thing that they're trying to do. When you get up into middle school, high school, college, that's when you can really be like deliberate. This is something you're going to hear us talk with Susanna about, deliberate about your practice.
And the reason the time may increase in practice is that the checklist gets longer. The to-do list becomes longer. And just like in life, in your practice, your to-do list is never going to end. You're always going to have something you could pick out and make a problem to solve in any given day. We have decided we're going to do something fun related to having Susanna on the podcast. So she is the creator of the Practizma practice journal, which is a 16-week practice journal that she has cultivated with action challenges and journal prompts and things like that in it. And each week is different and calls out a different element of practice. The big three for her are empowerment, efficiency, and joy in practice. And so the whole book is designed to cultivate those three things within each individual person. And so I started this journal like a year ago. And I think we've talked about this maybe on the podcast. I'm very externally motivated. Stephanie and I talk about this a lot. I kind of need like a buddy. I'm sure there are many of you out there that can identify with this. So Stephanie has agreed to do the Practizma practice journal with me all 16 weeks starting November 1st. And we thought it might be fun if we turn it into kind of like a Practizma practice club and invite other people to join us.
So we'll give you the details about this in another forum, but basically grab your Practizma journal and there'll be a way that we will set something up that we all can meet at regular intervals and check in and commiserate about doing this challenge together. We thought it would be a really fun viola-centric community idea to really connect with you guys and show you that we're struggling with the same things that you're struggling with too. So, we're all in this together.
Yes. And if you use the code ViolaCentric on Susanna's website, you'll get 10% off of the journal. We'll get your contact information. We're going to figure that out. You don't have to play viola to do this. The Practizma Practice Journal is designed for any instrumentalist who wants to do it, and it's not limited to that. So all of our musician friends, we would really like this opportunity to get to know you. It would be a way for us to interact with you in a group setting, which would be really cool.
Right. So pull the trigger. Go ahead and get your journal. The special is going to be good through the end of October. Use the code ViolaCentric for your discount, and then we will contact you about whatever regular scheduled meetings we have lined up.
Yes. It's going to be really fun.
Yes. So enjoy this conversation with Susanna Klein.
Hi again, everyone. Stephanie and I are incredibly excited to share that the Arkrest is an official Season 2 sponsor of the podcast. We're so proud to represent this fantastic product for violinists and violists, and we're going to be sharing various things that we love about the Arkrest throughout the season. Today, I want to express my deep appreciation for the freedom of movement that I experience while using it. I know I'm far from alone in having struggled with deeply painful shoulder injuries over the course of my career. One of the main causes for these issues was the limited mobility I had throughout my neck and shoulders while playing. Enter the Arkrest into my life. It is a super lightweight pad that actually rests on your collarbone, so there is no inhibition of your muscles to do their proper jobs while playing. It also provides comfortable support for maneuvering the trickiest passages or those long full pages of whole notes us violists are used to. We sincerely thank Arkrest for their support this season. Check them out at thearkrest.com. That's TheArkrest.com. We are so excited to be talking with Susanna Klein today. She is the Associate Professor of Violin at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, and she is the owner of Practice Blitz and Practizma, and now Clipza. Practice Blitz is the initial business, practice workshops, and she has a whole YouTube channel of practice tips. It's amazing, the library you have there. And then Practizma is this beautiful practice journal, which I'll probably reference a couple of times because I have used it myself and also given it to students. And the newest development in Susanna's world is Clipza, which is her app. I just love the way you approach practice. And I love the way you make people feel about practice. And what better time than right now at the start of a somewhat normal year to give people some encouragement and some excitement about getting back into shape with their instruments with practice. So thanks for joining us, friend.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
I am the jack of all trades. That's what I realized when you were doing the introduction.
So what's your elevator pitch for the way you describe your approach to practice and to coaching practice?
I help musicians make their practice insightful and delightful.
That's great.
Love it.
That they get more out of it and that they have a good time doing it and that they are happier with themselves. I just like to make tools for musicians so that they can be their own best teacher and kind of find the joy in their journey.
I love that. I am curious about your personal practice journey. How did that start for you? Did you always find joy in practice, or was there like a Mr. Miyagi type figure, a great teacher who kind of showed you the way of joyful practice?
To be totally honest, I don't think that I really have been engaging in truly joyful practice until I started doing this work. Or until I started seeing in my own students their lack of joy and their pressure and their anxiety and their ill feelings and all that stuff. I went to a summer camp. It was in Boone, North Carolina, and I had this side-by-side experience with North Carolina Symphony. And right there, in the flash of an instant, it was like music chose me.
Yep.
I think a lot of people have this type of experience, this sort of deeply cathartic experience, and then it's like a drug. You don't even have a choice. You have to do music, you know? And then in terms of my fascination with practice, I was behind. People told me so. People told me flat out, don't study music. You know, I had to practice really long. I don't think I necessarily practiced very smart. And then I had various teachers over the years and even, you know, post-college, even after I had my first job. And my favorite lessons were always the ones where teachers would say, well, have you practiced it like this? Have you practiced it like this? Have you practiced it like that? You know, like the 5 ways or something. And I'd be like, wow. All of them made something better. And that's when I was happiest. That's when I felt, you know, like it was possible, like the work was worth it. So to me, this sort of magic of the right kind of practice, I was always fascinated with that. What I didn't realize was how many bad feelings I had about practice, about the way I practiced or lack of practice, how much I measured myself simply by the hours. You put in X amount of time, you're a good person. You don't, you're not a good person. You don't deserve good things. And I mean, that's just totally crazy because now I'm like, oh, I could practice a half hour, record myself 10 times, and get way more done than if I practiced for 2 hours and didn't record myself at all. Now I know a lot more about the science of practicing, what we call sort of the illusion of mastery, like when you take a passage and you practice just this passage for half an hour, and that makes you feel better because at the end of it, you will be playing it better. But if you don't figure out what you're changing and you can't recall that, you can't embed that and make that reflexive, the next day it will be gone. And then you will have to practice exactly that passage again for a half an hour until you get to this sort of like base level competency. And what that does over time is it erodes your confidence and it makes you say, I am not talented. I am putting in the work, but I'm not worthy. And then that makes you tense and then your sound suffers. I guess the way that we practice can deeply influence the way that we feel about ourselves. And that part I was never really privy to until I started doing a lot of research and reading about the psychology of any practice or any work, whether it's music or not. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
No.
It's so good.
That's great. So you describe an aha moment, discovering what your purpose is in doing music and pursuing that in some way, but then being frustrated by not having the tools or the knowledge in order to be efficient with your practice.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was a question of talent. I thought practicing was about how many hours, and how good you get was a question of how talented you are. Yes, I knew that teachers could also teach you great concepts. I think I never appreciated how deeply our feelings cause us to act a certain way and our actions cause us to feel a certain way. Practice is one thing that is still, it is talked about, but in terms of excellence, not in terms of the psychology of practice. I'm like, why isn't there a field for this? There's a performance anxiety field, and that's great, but there's still no real field, or it's only nascent, that is really like, okay, let's talk about what practice is.
Yes.
I mean, even in scientific terms. And I find that students react really well to that. If I explain, when I assign technique scales or arpeggios or whatever, that is training the physical building blocks that you will need for your repertoire. It's the patterns. It's the patterns of fingerings that you need. It's the sound. It's the muscle memory so that you can operate on reflex. Technique practice is a long-term investment that pays dividends later. It allows you to sight read better. It allows you to concentrate on one task consciously while reflexively drilling another task. So you could do scales, but only listen to your, articulation or something. And that's one part of practice that we do. And I feel like when I explain to students, this is what it is, this is why we do it, they respond better to technique than when I just say, here are your scales. When we do performance practice, we're not learning how to play. We are learning how to cope with adrenaline in the body. That's what we're doing through breath, repeated exposure. But when it's all just magical, like you either lose your marbles on stage and get really nervous or you don't. Not only do they not feel good about the performance, but it sort of pathologizes everything about music, right? It means you don't have the gift or the calling, rather than this is a normal physiological response, although it will vary from person to person. And if you want your performance anxiety to go down, repeated exposure will do that.
Yes, totally. Like demystifying it, breaking it down into tangible steps that anyone can do. And that's not just something that someone who's super gifted at performing can do.
Yes, and it's not hocus pocus.
Yeah. I think this is so huge because when you speak about your own experience, Susanna, you're speaking everyone's practice journey, I think, unless they're fortunate enough to have a teacher who is exploring the deeper level of what it is that we do when we practice.
Right.
I mean, how many of us associate practice with just like that slog in the practice room for hours at a time? And when you talk, this is a big thing, when you talk about that feeling of spending hours and hours of practicing the same thing that's really difficult and then losing it and then having to rebuild it and then losing it and having to rebuild it. Yeah, over the course of a 15, 20-year career, if that's the way you've always practiced, what does that do to your confidence or even your belief that you're a decent musician?
Yes, and confidence is very, very important. I mean, it's important to our sound, it's important to our breath, it's important for optimism, not over practicing certain things. I think we've all had those times when we're confident, or we just don't know to be underconfident. That happens sometimes, right? Like if you're sick or something and you're just like, oh God, I don't care. I'll just sight read the best I can, and, Yes. And boom, you're doing it,
Then you're great.
because you're not second guessing yourself.
I also know we've had conversations before, Susanna, about your attention to sports psychology and how much overlap there is. We just haven't caught up. It's so interesting when you think about the culture of sports in this country and applying that to music. I'm getting off on a thought.
I love it.
Going down a thought rabbit hole here.
Keep
But
going.
even for young students, if the concept of sports psychology is placed into music and music was treated as valuable of an experience for those kids, like what that might do, that's something I feel like you have the potential to build on, making it that more commonplace way of approaching music rather than just, oh, here's this talented kid who should just keep playing the instrument, and go off and do that thing that nobody knows what they're doing.
Right, that sort of hero worship about talent. We have hero worship in sports too.
That's true.
But I do think we're fully aware that when people play high school sports, most of them don't join the NFL or become a professional basketball player or hockey player, whatever that is. But we believe in it for the teamwork, for the discipline, for digging deep, for becoming resilient, right? For becoming a, quote, good sport, aka good loser. Well, music does all of that. I mean, teamwork, hello. Discipline, long-term goal setting, dealing with disappointment, stage fright, the equivalent of public speaking. I think we as musicians know this very well, but I don't know that we talk about it in society in the right way to have everybody really understand that. And then the other thing that really interests me in sports is there's so much gamified, there's so much science behind it, these terms of training or physiological, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, we're just small muscle athletes and we do it for a different reason. The psychology thing, I mean, there are sports psychologists. There are no music psychologists, just as an example. And then the technology, I'm just so jealous of the technology.
Yeah.
So jealous of the ability to measure the speed of a ball, to know how many times a pitcher has thrown so that they can stop. You know, all right, we've reached our daily quota. We're now going to protect the asset by getting the pitcher to stop practicing. The ability through technology to conceptualize things. And when I've done that with students, it's just been so fun for them. It's funny because it's concrete and abstract at the same time, you know? When you say, okay, your heart rate, look at what your heart rate is. Can you bring that down with your breath? It's more concrete. And at the same time, it's more abstract. They can see themselves sort of more separate. At least with my experimentation with technology, that's been true. So when students see themselves like in a motion capture suit and they're like a stick figure playing the violin.
Yeah.
It's like they can do more groundbreaking work, more patient work, more resilient work without being embarrassed than when they're just the violinist in the room in front of a mirror. Mm-hmm. Why? I'm not 100% sure. I don't totally get it, but maybe it's just fun.
Yeah, there's something about dissociation and taking all the judgment away and just being like, oh, I see that violinist on the screen there could have a straighter bow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think technology is a way of gamifying for students, and I think that's fun. Let's make it fun. Let's get away from all excellence. Clipza, the app that I developed with a friend, I use that a lot to teach. It came out of a research project that I did at the university where we were studying musicians' practice habits and what is associated with feeling good about practice or highly efficient practice. It was several years ago. And we kind of built an app to try and track what they were doing in practice. And one of the things that we had in there to make recording easy was just this video camera that once you opened it, it was always recording you and ditching the recording unless you interacted with the camera, and then it would capture the last 30 seconds. That was very, very popular with students because they didn't have to decide to press the record button. Mm-hmm. They only had to decide to press essentially the recall button. This summer, I finally took that code and we built it out with my friend Randall and made this app. So the video camera is going. It's constantly taking video and dumping it. And if at any point you want to see what you just did, you swipe left on the screen and it'll replay instantly. It could be 15 seconds or 30 or 45 or a minute and a half. Or you could tap the screen and it'll capture what you do, the last 30 seconds, save it, but you're going to keep practicing because you want to check that later. So that I use in lessons all the time because I just have it going, and then at any point where I'm like, stop, hold on, and I just swipe the screen left and I'm like, see, what do you see here?
I love that so much because whenever I'm teaching a lesson, and I find this with my own practice too, it's hard to both observe and perform at the same time.
Absolutely.
And so I ask my students a lot, okay, here's what I want you to do. I don't want you to think about anything else. I want you to observe your bow as you're playing this passage. But they're still having to perform, and you can't do both. I'm not very good at doing both.
Yes, and for me, in front of the mirror, I fix everything in front of the mirror, but then I see myself in video and I'm like,
yes.
Oh my
Still
God, what's
totally.
What is going on with the face and the posture and the everything, you know?
Yep.
And I think my frustration as a practicer also was that recording is psychologically so difficult, right?
Yes.
To like hit that record button.
You
Oh my
know
God.
it's there, you know it's rolling, and you're thinking about the fact that it's rolling, and yeah, totally.
So now, if I use a regular recording, not Clipza, I use it to make me nervous. I say, I'm going to record, and it is part of my stage fright preparation.
Love that.
Think of technology just as tools. So technology can also be old-fashioned things. Like I write little messages on ping pong balls sometimes, and for their scales, they just pick out of a jar or something. And, you know, say, I don't know, super diva scales, meaning they have to play extra confident. Or for string players, like only at the frog, or all down bows, or only the top octaves, or some way of mixing it up and making it fun and not same old like okay, first thing in the lesson, let's listen to some scales. Sometimes routine can be really anti-joy. And if you just find one little surprise or make them laugh, I don't know that I've made them a better musician, but I've made them a little bit, hopefully more buoyant in that moment, doing difficult things. We use Tom Play to play along. I don't know if you guys know that app.
No.
It's got all these accompaniment tracks on it.
Oh, cool.
Super fun. Super fun.
That is fun.
And they're building up a huge library. There's like a yearly subscription, or you can do it by piece.
There's probably like 5 viola pieces on there.
You can request pieces. That's what's amazing if you're a yearly member. But you should check it out. It's fun. It's really fun for students.
It's so exciting to hear you talk about your applications when you're teaching your students, because I went to school for performance. I did not take pedagogy class. Everything I do in teaching is based on my own experience. And I have felt a need for evolution in my own teaching in the last few years to be centered more around the individual that I'm teaching, and also how to make it relevant to the way their lives are now,
right,
versus what my experience was in being trained for music, and really seeing that student from the perspective of what their life is about. And the technology piece is so important, and we know so little about it, but this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, and it's hugely underdeveloped.
Yes. Yes.
Ironically, last year I felt like I did a lot more innovative things because we all had to. And now I'm like, it's funny. I feel like I've been not teaching well the last couple weeks. It's just this feeling. You have those moments, right, where you're like, it's not clicking. And I think it's because I did so much more innovative gamifying, getting students to take on risk in fun challenges last year. And now we're all in person again. And I'm actually struggling to incorporate some of those ideas in the live lesson because I haven't had to. I've not done that before. We did things over Zoom, like Name That Tune, where people had to perform on mute and people had to guess like what concerto that was. And it's just like a baby step towards performance, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
People can see you, but they can't hear you. And it's really fun for the audience. I haven't figured out, wait, how do I do that in person? Okay, well, I can't do that in person, but how do I do something else that is like that? Technology can help you build community and can allow for resilience. Is just a really tough thing, and I think we all benefit. I don't care what you're going to study. When you become a more daring player or person who plays, that's good for your whole life. It doesn't matter if you study medicine or music or whatever. And games and technology can really, really help. You can suit somebody up in a motion capture suit, and all of a sudden they're performing in front of a class more easily than if they weren't. It's the weirdest thing. And they'll have more fun.
I want to get in a motion capture suit.
It is really fun.
You've done that? Yeah. That is so cool.
Yeah. I mean, they just turn us into stick figures, but they could turn us into like bunnies or whatever. Cartoons, basically.
That would be amazing.
Animated movies.
Put us on like a green screen where you're performing in front of the Cleveland Orchestra or something.
Exactly. There's a lot we can explore.
It's a completely different generation and time. It's almost as if the evolution dial has been turned and it's making everything in hyperspeed. Like the evolution of technology just in the last 30 years. So things that we grew up with doing are still valuable, but they can be evolved into these much more effective and efficient ways of doing things.
Robust. And yet often they're not.
Yeah.
That's the irony, right?
Right. Yeah. So I wonder if classical music is so rooted in tradition. This is the way my teacher taught me. This is the way things have been going since Golamian did these scale books. I wonder if we're just more resistant to change and evolution in our field.
Yeah, well, we've all been taught that way. We all believe that this is what leads to mastery, and mastery is everything. So that's sort of the natural output of that. We think we're meant to suffer, and if we don't suffer, if we're having too much fun, then it's not legit. It's not real.
Yes.
Totally.
Excellence is everything, but dry excellence.
Totally.
And I've found working with students that actually fun excellence is a lot easier to come by. But I have to admit that sometimes I'm like, oh my God, why do I have to do this? When I was your age, I went to the library and I got out a record and I studied my score and I sat there with headphones for an hour.
Oh, listening libraries.
Yeah, Now they have it on YouTube in their pocket. Coming back to talking about the field also in psychological and scientific terms.
Yes.
I think is helpful to students. Like there's training, there's rep, There's mental practice and there's performance practice. Those are the 4 elements. And so when I say, have you listened to your piece? It's not like a shame, have you listened to your piece? Because all good musicians listen to pieces. This is a whole category of practice. And we know that the best musicians, the ones that make the progress fastest, which is what students are interested in, they spend a lot of time in this category. That's what we know from research. Or we know from research that people who perform often start to perform better under pressure. In fact, it's the only thing that we know about performance anxiety, is that repeated exposure lessens the effect of adrenaline on your playing system. And just to say, well, let's make a plan. How many performances can we come up with this semester? 10, 20? And that kind of excites them. I'll say, okay, let's try for 20. How can we do 20? And they're like, well, do you have roommates? Do you have friends? Who can you play for? And kind of going about it as a project.
Yes.
And talking about it in scientific terms.
It's the first time I think the word has come up in conversation of shame. I think what you're ultimately doing is reducing the possibility that what we do as teachers could be shame-inducing in a student. Because really, when it comes down to it, if you have fear about your own abilities to do something, chances are that that has come from somewhere, right? Someone along the way has delivered a message that makes you feel shameful about your inability to do something. As a teacher, that is not your intention.
Right.
Even our teachers who we call, how did you put it?
Less awesome.
Less awesome teachers.
I bet I have a lot of students who describe me that way.
No way. I'm certain their goal wasn't to shame us, but if they don't have the tools to deliver the importance of these 4 elements, it's so great to even put it that way. It's almost an internal reframing that we have to do as instructors in how we deliver these messages. Maybe the messages themselves aren't changing all that much, but understanding why they're effective and then building on that can be a huge way to go forward.
Yeah, and even sometimes the shaming isn't from what we say, it's from what we don't say. For example, students will often compare themselves naturally to other students, right?
Of course.
And then they're like, oh, so-and-so has it all together. They're awesome. They never fail. They look cool, calm and collected. When they played, they didn't miss a thing and they were not terrified. At VCU, we sort of treat ourselves like a sports team. We have like a team name and everything, and team captains and all that. So we will dig into the psychology, and people have been honest in masterclass, like, well, Stacy has it all together. Her recital was just like flawless. And I said, okay, Stacy, you want to talk about how you prepared for that? How many people did you play for? And she's like, oh my God, I don't even know. I was like, okay, let's make a list. Let's take the time in class to make a list of how many people you played for. Just for other students to know, oh, that's what I perceive as talent and inborn and luck and whatever is actually not. Because as you said, I don't think we mean to pathologize things or make students feel bad. I know that some of the things that I've caught on video, I've taped lessons and caught myself like doing like a sigh in lessons. Audibly. And I'm like mortified. How could I do that? I hated this when my teachers did this.
I've been there. Yep.
I hated it. And I'm so unaware. But what I'm actually frustrated in isn't so much the student in that moment. It's my own inability to describe things in a different way so that this student will understand the concept that I'm trying to do. Right?
Yeah.
And so like I am frustrated. But it's much better to say, it's not you. It's me. I'm struggling to put this into words. We're just going to have to keep working on it. Or maybe you'll take a master class with somebody. You're on the right path. There can be teacher frustrations as well.
Yes.
So I think just being honest and being honest about our own struggles, that's probably the best gift we can give.
Yeah, it's so good. That's the other thing I love about the technology of the app. If you are asking a student to fix something about their bow, the bow isn't straight. And maybe at first they don't really believe that it's not straight. So you have the clip, and as you've said, it's concrete and it's not subjective coming from your teacher's mouth. It's something you can physically look at, and then you can make that adjustment and you can gauge that progress. I think that goes a long way to help reduce that shame element.
Yeah, seeing is believing. And, we are in the business of teaching them to teach themselves.
Right.
Since we're with them for, 45 minutes or whatever, and then the rest of their practice time is, quote, unattended. So the best gift we can give them is how to listen themselves and hear things, how to perceive things, creative problem solving. I just do it a lot in the lesson and kind of hope that rubs off and they do it as well, whether it's voice memos, audio recording, or video or whatever, because it's not a big deal. It's not, we are recording now. We're data driven all the time in small ways. Kind of curating the listening experience with them can be helpful too, because students listen, they just sometimes listen in a different hierarchy than we want them to listen to. Sometimes they're more pitch obsessed when we want them to be more sound oriented, or vice versa. And so going through that recording process with them and listening back, taking the time to do that, even though, yes, it does suck up valuable lesson time, can really be worth it. Can be a long-term investment.
I'm reading this book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. There's a whole section in there about practice, and it feels so germane to our discussion right now. And you use this term too, deliberate practice. Can you talk about deliberate practice and discovery practice and how this should fit into your, like, the percentage that you spend on which types of practice?
Well, I think most of our practice should be deliberate practice. I do believe in goof off time in practice. 10 minutes of whatever you want to do, just run through it, jam, have fun. But the rest of the time, I think, should be deliberate practice. And deliberate practice just means we're actively listening, starting to make hypotheses about why something is breaking down or how we want it to change. We won't really know the answer until we try creative solutions. Let me try this. Let me try that. Let me try this. Let me try that. Oh, I found the one thing that is changing physically my body to achieve the sound that I want. I'm moving sooner, later, more left, more up, more down. We're changing something physically. And then once we've discovered that, then we repeat in order to embed that and make that change more reflexive so that the next time when we play it, it comes out that way. That's how I would describe deliberate practice. Undeliberate practice is playing stuff over and over until it becomes more familiar and your body starts to anticipate what's coming next. And so that gives the illusion of mastery. Because tomorrow it'll be better, certainly, because it'll be more familiar, but it won't be transformed. So if you had an issue with a little fingering, and if you don't really understand what you're asking your body to change, I don't think the long-term prognosis is good for that little spot. And then the long-term prognosis on stage is really bad when you have too many of those, what I call familiarity practice, as opposed to deliberate practice. I think deliberate practice is about change. Changing something, not getting more familiar, but actually changing what happens in the body and then embedding that change so it becomes automatic. That's what I think deliberate practice is.
I studied with Burton Kaplan.
Nice.
He has a practice retreat that he holds up in rural New York State. He has a whole book about practice techniques, and he describes this as breaking it down and observing for one thing at a time.
I have his book, actually.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, it was a big influence for the Practizma journal. Just that really scientific-y kind of approach to practice.
Yes.
And there's a lot of trial and error in it. There's a lot of listening, really, and that's some of what we're teaching students is how to really listen. It's hard to really listen.
Yeah. I'll throw this question out there. Let's just say you are someone who learned Don Juan when you were 16 years old. A lot of musicians do. I was one of them. Here in Northern Virginia, for heaven knows what reason, Don Juan is usually a required excerpt for senior regionals. No high schooler should be learning Don Juan. I just want to throw that out there. But we do.
Amen, sister.
Right?
Yeah, right.
It's ridiculous to try to teach it and to have to teach it knowing that, whatever habits are going to be formed as that high schooler is learning, they're going to have to dismantle some of them. I'm certain every single musician has to do this. So what would you say to someone who's kind of going through that process of, someone can play those types of shifts in any other piece of music, but when it comes to Don Juan, something doesn't land.
Because of that trigger you're talking about, that's sort of
yes.
And because it wasn't learned in the right way in the first place.
Right.
I say oof because, there are certain concertos that I can't even teach because I'm I'll have a psychological breakdown.
It's so triggering.
It's so triggering. Like Tchaikovsky concerto. I'm yes. Okay, no one in my studio. I can't go back there. Do you guys know the book, The Perfect Wrong Note by William Westney?
No.
You should look into that. He talks a lot about explorative practice. Instead of avoiding errors, actually just seeing whatever comes out, just totally going for it and allowing your body to do what it naturally wants to do. And then going back and kind of retraining just that little bit. He's a big proponent of not controlling in practice so much, but actually just listening and observing. I highly recommend it for anyone who's dealing with psychology of practice and how to engage in deliberate practice in a kind of creative way. And then it's like everything else in life. I mean, just because I work hard all day doesn't mean I can't have a little Netflix at night, right? So like if you're doing really great, digging deep, transformative practice, that has to be in balance with some goof off time and some bigger picture things. So if you're really deconstructing a piece, let's say Don Juan, measure by measure, then you should have something that you might play through and have some fun and work on some dynamics and some bigger picture, some musicianship skills. Because when we overutilize that part of the brain, that can become painful. And when we do it too long, that can become painful. So limit your practice sessions at one time to 50 minutes or less. The research says after 50 minutes, concentration goes down. In all fields, doesn't matter if it's nursing, pilots, whatever. And for us, tension goes up. So why push past that? Just observe it, come back.
Well, and I think it goes without saying that the more deliberate your practice becomes, the less you need to feel like you have to spend 4 hours a day playing your instrument. You become more efficient.
Yes, you become more efficient, and most people love that. You know, most people want to get better. That's what makes them happy, actually, is they want to get better as soon as possible. Sometimes those arcs are very long. Sometimes you have a block, you know, and it takes a long time to get through it. So there are other tricks like ending your practice on a positive note, having some fun at the end of your practice, and dedicating, 5 or 10 minutes to something that you really can play before you put your instrument in the case. We know from research, again, it's not a music thing, but people tend to remember the activity that they're engaged in by how they felt at the end of the activity. So if you're feeling really anxious or upset with yourself, spend a few minutes on a piece that you love, that you know you can play, and then pack up. And you will be more likely to want to go practice again. That's all just the research that I'd like to pass on. This has been researched in every other field. Why aren't we talking about this in music? Can we just let people know?
Well, that's important. You're an important translator.
That's a good way of putting it. I'm kind of like Alan Alda is for the sciences, you know, how he's like not a scientist, but he really talks the talk of science, you know. So that's what I love to do for the psychology and technology of practicing.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, it's just so important what you're doing.
And the same can be said for a lesson, you know, if no matter how frustrating things get in a lesson, and I try to do this intuitively, but I have to remember, make time for something positive at the end. Play a duet, you know.
That's a great point.
For you as the teacher and for the student. It's tricky to be aware of all these things, but I think people proselytizing about there's so much more we need to know and address. Most of it's all about habits and psychology. Hardly any of it is actually musical.
Right.
I have this thing with my students, what am I trying to embed in them? And it's creativity, resilience, optimism, discipline, and organization. Those 5. And like creativity, so that's problem solving. How else could I do this? Who else could I ask? What else could I do? Resilience is daring greatly, in the words of Brene Brown, or, you know, taking on risk by choice. Of course, it's recovering from failure, but it's really daring that I'm interested in when I talk about resilience. Optimism. Do I believe I can do it? Which is so important for, you know, not having so much tension. Doing daring things requires us to be optimistic, right? Discipline. Showing up for enough time. I was always good at that. The enough time was like my forte, but it was the really deliberate part, being highly efficient, being data driven, not spinning your wheels, you know?
Yes.
Triage in your work habits. And then organization. That's a small one, but it can be transformative for some students who don't know where their stuff is and don't know how to stay organized within their week. So organization is both time and things. Croto.
Love it.
And you have a practice journal called Practizma that you've developed.
Yeah, the way that all came about was that after VCU, where I teach, made this big Cinderella run in 2011 for March Madness, the basketball team, I started following the coach, Shaka Smart, and he had a minor in psychology, and he did a ton of psychological work with his players.
He's such a cool dude, too, right?
He is, totally. And that got me way deep into sports again. I was like, why aren't we doing all these things? And so I started doing stuff with my students. And because Elite Athletes Journal, that's like a thing in sports, I started doing that with my students. I would have reflection prompts for them every week. After a few semesters, then I started putting action challenges in there, you know, go play for 2 people, or practice all your stuff backwards, or record yourself 3 times, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or et cetera, et cetera. So I had all this content, and a friend of mine was like, you should publish. And I was like, well, I wouldn't know how to do that, and blah, blah, blah. So I got over that eventually. But basically, I picked from 8 years worth of prompts and tried to make a sequence out of it that would work for all instruments. And it's supposed to be, you know, like a deep practice challenge for 16 weeks to really learn some new ways of practicing and learn some stuff about yourself and kind of develop a more positive journey, I guess. It's a workbook. And I thought originally that it would be used most often like for teenagers, but I think the big market has a lot of post-school professionals, a lot of freelancers, a lot of people who have been in school, in music school, and then find themselves all of a sudden floating, you know, without peers and a system. And then a lot of music teachers use it for their own craft or to teach.
Genius.
It is.
It's something that I think everyone, like you said, in the postgraduate realm, we sometimes just need a little something, a little challenge to kind of push us to follow through with.
A little accountability to yourself. Yeah, or new ideas, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to turn the page. This is this week's prompt. I may like it or not like it, but I'm doing it, you know, because
Yes.
I'm digging deep and I'm learning new things. It's a little easier than to come up with all that stuff yourself.
Yeah, and I saw on your website that you actually have a buddy pack where you can get two of them.
Yeah.
So you can conscript one of your friends
Yes,
to
yes,
be like,
because
"You're
everything
doing
works
this
better with,
me."
yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
So for all of you obligers out there who need
It's so
need
much easier. It's so
accountability.
much easier.
Yeah, Stephanie, are you going to get one so we can do it at the
thinking
same
about
time?
it. It's like, let's do it. Let's do
I
it.
have mine ready and waiting to go. I started it.
You need an
I didn't
accountability.
have any external motivation.
You're an obliger. You need somebody to.
You both know this about me. My journey with practice is a challenging one. I have talked about how I haven't associated joy with practice for a really long time. You know, it's felt more like whenever I go into the practice mode, I'm confronting all of the demons that sit inside of me that fight with
Yep.
me on being a musician. And so to have a way to reframe that, just like anything else in your life that you want to reframe, is really great.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And, you know, in trying to cure others, still trying to cure myself. Like, that's
The
you know.
struggle.
After it came out, actually, I was like, okay, let me do it exactly in this order, the way I published it. I'm like, damn, this is hard. Like, you know, because it's long and it asks you
Yeah.
to dig deep. And that's when I put the buddy pack up for sale. 'Cause with a partner, I had no problem. It was
Yes.
very easy. It was like,
Yes.
oh,
Yeah.
what'd you think of this prompt this week? You know, I could socialize around it.
I love that.
Maybe that's what we should do. Maybe
I
we
was just
should
going to
have
say,
anybody who's listening wants to join us. We should do
want to
it.
do it with us.
Yeah, I love it.
So if people want to go on this journey with us and with you, Susanna, where can they find information about you, about your journal, about your app?
Yeah, my website is practizma.com. It's Practizma. I was just looking at my book. I had to look it up. Practizma.com. The journal is for sale there. I also list retailers who sell it. There are quite a few. Please support them because they've had an incredibly rough year and a half. The app is listed on there too. It's on iOS right now only. It's called Clipza with a Z. Always that Z in there.
It's your thing.
It's her
But
trademark.
the Z is supposed to be the fun, you know. I have a theme. And you can find me on Instagram also at Practizma with a Z.
Yep.
You can follow me there. And I do like little mini blogs, you know, when I have the
Yeah.
I
time.
love it.
And also, you are a very skilled presenter in a workshop setting. It is so great to have you break down concepts with groups of students, or if you're in a group of musicians that gets together and plays and you want to have somebody kind of jump in and inspire you in a way that you haven't been inspired to practice before. I know firsthand that Susanna's great at
Awesome.
that
Thank you.
and can do it virtually, very adept.
Yeah, I learned. I can apparently. I mean, actually, there's some opportunities virtually that you don't have when you're all in the room. You know, you can make
That's
noise
right.
and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's fun.
Very cool.
Super fun. It turns out it's weird because I started out being very passionate about medicine and sports when I was in high school and playing a little bit. And it's like now I'm playing, but I'm in this sort of field that's all about sports and medical research. And sometimes it takes a while for your, like, quote, inner voice, you know, to find you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Sometimes you just have to be patient and be really disciplined about what you do. Because I would say that I'm happier doing what I'm doing now than when I was playing orchestra full time. Because I still play and I teach and I do all these other things. And it turns out jack of all trades is a little bit who I was really meant to be. Like how I started off is kind of how I ended up. I staggered them all in. Certainly at some point I was really just playing and just practicing, but it turns out that full circle, now I can see how that's not an accident.
I love that.
Me too.
The universe conspired to get you to this point.
Yeah, or it's like those things are within you, and sometimes it requires time and opportunity. Because I think in high school I was like, well, what should I do? It was this horrible conflict, and I was like, okay, if I don't do music, I'll regret it. That was literally why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And now I think I do a little bit of all of that. So I kind of get my fix in all different ways anyway.
And you're relating it from the perspective of music, and you're filling a need.
Yeah, I'm
right?
trying to create some tools for people to make the journey for the next generation, and for us too, to make it a little bit more positive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what we can do. I would like people to feel a little bit more positive and empowered than I did.
Totally.
Speaking our language, yeah, this concept of, and I think we all believe this, that every musician is not just a musician. Like, we all have something unique to offer, and we kind of get put on a conveyor belt that funnels us into this idea that maybe that's not the case. But it's amazing that the things that lit you up when you were younger are now filtered into your life.
Yeah,
still as a musician.
Exactly. It wasn't a liability. It wasn't a distraction. For so many years, I used to think, if I had just not wasted so many hours running track and swimming, I could have been such a better violinist.
Mm.
And that just fueled the shame of, why am I not better?
Yes.
It's taken me a long time to realize, like, actually, those things were assets. And had I had the time, I wouldn't have practiced efficiently anyway. So there's that,
Same.
We don't need to pathologize things for no reason. We don't need to say, I'm a late starter, so therefore I'm less worthy. So what? Late starter. Maybe it's just the opposite. It's possible, right? I think those discussions are worth having. What are all those messages that we're sending ourselves? And I think the way that we behave, the way that we practice, and the way that we talk to ourselves can have a deep influence.
Absolutely. So beautifully put.
Thank you so much, Susanna.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me and talking about the subject that are nearest and dearest to my heart.
It's been so great.
Well, you guys have a special thing going. You talk authentically about so many things in the music world that are not really being talked about at all. Kudos to the podcast. Because I still feel like even most music podcasts, there are a couple exceptions, which are really awesome, but most of them are still about, how can we be more excellent? How can we be more excellent?
Yes.
How to get better? It's still, excellence is the holy grail. And hey, happiness, or balance, or all those other things, So
Well-being. Yeah.
Well-being,
Yeah.
That's optional, That's not optional. That's a must-have.
Absolutely.
Not in every minute, but certainly in large measure. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much for listening today, and thanks also to our Season 2 sponsor, Arkrest.
Another thanks to Alto Clef Gifts, where you can purchase viola-centric shirts and mugs and a variety of other fun items featuring our beloved alto clef.
You can support our future episodes by supporting our sponsors through our PayPal link or Venmo, and by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. And please consider sharing your favorite episodes with your music-loving friends.
Our episodes are produced by Liz O'Hara Starr.
The viola-centric theme music was written and produced by JP Wogeman and is performed by Steph and myself.
Thanks again for listening. Let's talk soon.